I've decided to divide this module into an A, B, and C. A corresponding to what we just did, physical development or biological, depending on which theories we're talking about. It means the same thing basically. Module B would be cognitive, and Module C would be emotional, social, or socio-emotional, or psychosocial if you prefer. But let's take this as a moment to review. How did we define infancy? How do we define toddlerhood? Well, we define infancy as the first year of life. Toddlerhood begins at the very tail end of that first year and continues until age 3. Perhaps you've heard scientific assertions of what babies can tell, what they can know, and you wonder, well, how do we possibly know that? For example, let's say if we want to know what age a baby can distinguish various colors, we would repeatedly present the baby the same color, and they would become disinterested. Then we would sneak in a different color. If they showed interest again, they can tell the difference. If they continue to be bored, they cannot tell those two colors apart. So the question is, would this be an example of learning using habituation, learning through insight, or social learning? If you said habituation, you are indeed correct. Much of what we know about very young infants comes from studies on habituation. I should add that other researchers, instead of looking at the disinterested behavior, look at changes in sucking reflex when a baby's binky is placed into the mouth. Let's consider some language milestones. Again, maturation, not learning. So babbling, usually 4 to 6 months, somewhere in there. Make sounds with you, so you make a sound, they make a sound. Game back and forth. At the end of that same time period, single words, yearish. Now you might be hoping that it might be mama or dada, but it's equally likely to be hi or bye or cookie. 2-word combinations. Give milk. It's not milk give, it's give milk. Year 2. We began this section by noting that milestones are maturational. So regardless of the child's culture, the milestones occur at the same point. And the words are spoken in the same pattern, no matter how the culture orders them. So it's give milk, not milk give. And whereas very few cultures have a double negative, don't got none, we all start with the being a proficient at the double negative. So we see lots of vowel sounds, ahs and oohs. Vowel sounds are what cooing is about. After they begin cooing, the next step is babbling, which is going to be introducing many consonant sounds, even consonant sounds that are not used in that particular child's language. Now let's consider the next question, if you're good with that. Are there differences with deaf or autistic spectrum babies in babbling, or do they babble the same as all other children? We began this section by noting that milestones are maturational. So regardless of the child's culture, the milestones occur at the same point. And the words are spoken in the same pattern, no matter how the culture orders them. So it's give milk, not milk give. And whereas very few cultures have a double negative, don't got none, we all start with the being a proficient at the double negative. Let's look at characteristics of early language, starting with the hollow phrase. It's often not a word, it's a phrase, a part of a word, but to the child conveys a full sentence of information. So instead of saying bottle, it might be ba, but ba means I want milk in the bottle. Ba might be I dropped ba on the bottle on the floor. So dot might be doggy, which means it's time to take the doggy for a walk because I get to go too, because while the dog walks, I get to ride on daddy's back. So it's a utterance, word or likely sound that has a full sentence, and it's up to mom or dad or whoever's taking care of the child to interpret this hollow phrase. Next, let's consider two opposites, under extensions and over extensions. Under extensions is when the child uses the word much too specifically. Dog to them might mean not all dogs, but specifically and only the family dog. Daddy doesn't mean every daddy or the child's next to them daddy, it means only my daddy. Over extensions are the opposite, where, for example, doggy means not only my dog, but at a certain point it might mean all dogs, and it might be also all cats and all cows and all horses, basically anything with four legs. So over use of it versus underuse of it. I'll give you an example right now. Let's say mom, the birth mother, takes the child to the supermarket, and the child looks at a strange man in uniform and says, "Daddy." And mom's very embarrassed because she's thinking that the man thinks that the child doesn't know who their own baby's father is. So in any case, is that child that calls any man in uniform daddy doing an underextension over an overextension? And we're talking about a slightly older child here in this example, but still the principle is exactly the same. So I assume that was easy, and indeed that was an overextension. Now let's consider telegraphic speech. Now you probably have never sent a telegram, but you know what they are. You're paying per letter, you're paying per click. So you want to make the message as brief as possible with only the essential words. So it's not maybe a college student saying, "Send me some money, mom, please," because it's send money, period. In trouble, period. So you're getting rid of the ofs and the thes and the ands and all the unnecessary words. Well, when you're acquiring language, that's how we all speak, with just the essentials. That's telegraphic speech. Lastly, let's consider child-directed speech. We typically talk to babies differently and with good reason. If you're learning a foreign language or a language other than English, if that's your norm, it's often hard to tell where words begin and end. They seem to blur together. So you would often ask a person to say, "Speak very slowly for me." Well, the child's the same way, so parents automatically speak much more slowly. The pitch goes up, which is more interesting. There's emphasis on the words, which makes it so much more interesting. And all those are done, often unknowingly, by parents to facilitate speech. And these patterns are much more strong in the middle class than the lower SES, so it's a good pattern to be used by all parents and to be encouraged in all parents. Let's start with deaf babies. Deaf babies will coo and babble. Though to an experienced ear, the babbling may not be quite the same as a hearing baby. At a certain point, though, the babbling will actually decrease. What's going on is the brain is wired correctly, so the child is producing cooing or babbling. But since the ears are not giving sound to the brain, that will impact the brain's future development, which is why if hearing aids would work, they need to be introduced at that point to avoid long-term differences in communication ability. Let's consider a baby that's on the autistic spectrum. The parents would not know this at this age. This baby will also coo and will typically babble, but again, to a discerning ear, to a knowledgeable, educated ear, there will be differences. And we should say there are different levels of autism spectrum from mild to severe. So a mild child may have no differences at all in cooing and babbling. For a child that's more moderate or severely on the spectrum, their babbling may decrease altogether. They may also be less socially responsive than is typical, not smiling when they're looking at the caregivers, maybe not following the caregiver's face with the intensity of a non-spectrum child. Again, early intervention is critical so the brain will proceed on a more typical path. And it's not unusual if this does not occur readily enough, the baby will stop babbling, stop cooing, and may not get to the first word stage, or sometimes if they get to the first and two-word stage, they may again regress or even fully lose language. So again, early assessment and treatment is essential. So let's next consider Jean Piaget, his theory of cognitive development or child cognitive development. You probably met him in Intro Psych and were reintroduced or maybe introduced for the first time earlier in this course. Let's consider the term schema or schemata if you prefer. It's a mental framework which holds and organizes your knowledge. It's much easier to modify an existing schema than to create a new one. It's much harder to learn how to play chess than to tweak and learn a new move. Intro Psych, if you had me, remember we did the schema of a sports car. The clip art attached to this particular slide shows the schema for a dog. So it would organize all a child's knowledge at that point of what is a dog. So let's now consider how schemas change. We'll use the example from the previous slide with the dog schema. In assimilation, new information is added on to an existing schema. Maybe to that schema, dogs sometimes wear coats. Accommodation is when there's new information that causes need to change, to modify, alter the original schema. So maybe the original schema was dogs are anything that have four legs. Maybe accommodation might change that. Maybe assimilation on a different concept would be that all birds fly. Maybe the child goes to the zoo and learns that, most birds fly, but ostriches do not fly. So let's say that a child has a schema for doggies, and it entirely consists of they are big, have four legs, they lick, and that causes me to laugh. That's it. Obviously, they're going to learn a lot more about doggies as they proceed in life, and let's look at the ways that they can do this. So in assimilation, we've just added on to an existing schema. So not only the additional information that was before, now doggies can be very small. So assimilation, just adding on information. Accommodation, modifying it. So the boy at first wants to just say that that's a fluffy dog. He's trying to assimilate it. But if he listens to the kitty will convince him perhaps that he's a cat, and he will have to change his schema for what a doggy is. So in this example, the child just added on a little bit more information. Doggies have four legs, and some doggies are huge. So it might be incorrect, but this is the child's view, and it is an example of clearly assimilation. Later on down the road, they might realize that, cows are different than doggies, but that's not on the slide. It's down the road for that child. For this slide, all you need to know is the name and order of the four stages, and that in this chapter, that is infancy and infancy and toddlerhood, we are in the sensory motor stage. As the beginning narration of this chapter would suggest, the sensory motor stage is the most complex stage. For Piaget, the stage is from birth to 2 years, and the child has intelligence, yes, but sensory motor, based directly on the senses, based directly on movement. So they have to learn how to use their body. They have to acquire, through maturation and learning, the use of the visual equipment, how to sit up, turn over, roll over, stand, walk. So the intelligence is focused on the immediate use of the body. And they'll acquire some very interesting and profound abilities, starting with the one we'll discuss in the next slide, object permanence. Many students fail to be impressed by object permanence because we have had it so long we can't imagine not having it. But still, it is a totally impressive feat when we accomplish this. Imagine knowing that things exist even when you can't see them, hear them, touch them, feel them. We're not born that way. Initially, out of sight is literally out of mind. Although this child has a very attractive toy in front of it, the mere placement of that board in front of the child, it's now gone. The child doesn't get upset, try to reach around it. Out of sight, out of mind. I think you'll enjoy this short little clip on object permanence. A lot of research uses the violation of expectations method. You'll watch this clip, I hope, and you'll see Professor Renee Beijing demonstrate it. Very clever experiment. And I do love the little look on the boy's face as she goes through the experiment. You'll see the A not B error when you click the link. You should note that the child that's reached the point where they can successfully tackle object permanence will still make the A not B error for a bit. So let's now consider the sensory motor substages. There are 6, and each will involve a certain degree of new vocabulary, though not too much for the first one. For a substage, that of reflexive behaviors. So the baby's primary way of interacting with the world is reflexes. If the cheek is touched lightly, the head automatically, reflexively turns towards it, and the sucking motion will begin. So it's automatic. And we did discuss other reflexive behaviors earlier, so it would also include those, of course. Okay, here's our first term and second substage. That of primary circular reactions. You can see the first 4 months, and you might appreciate that the months jump in pretty nice regular intervals. Makes it easier for learning. But anyway, a circular reaction is something that's done at first unintentionally, accidentally. But at a certain point, it becomes done on purpose. Primary means it's body focused. So maybe you accidentally put your fingers into your mouth as a baby, and this is delightful. You don't know how it was done, you don't know how to do it again, but as it happens accidentally and accidentally and accidentally, the child will learn how to do it. It becomes then a primary circular reaction. That accidental act can now be done on purpose, and primary means it's body oriented. Months 4 to 8, secondary circular reactions, very similar, but now it's object oriented. So something interesting happens with an object. You knock a ball with things in it and it makes a nice rattling noise, and it's accident, accident, accident. And when you do it intentionally and the ball makes that enticing noise, that's now a secondary circular reaction. Let's now consider, and if you wonder why I take such odd pauses and stop, you have no idea how many times I record these and stumble, and I accept a certain degree of stumbling, but most slides have to be recorded and recorded and recorded, so that's why, if you're wondering. Okay, but on to where we are. Coordination of secondary circular reactions. So this is the first goal-directed behavior where the child can choose to do something and pursue it. Choose to crawl over to something interesting. Choose to, what have you, crawl over to the doggy, choose to steal doggies' food whenever possible. Hopefully not. Okay, next, tertiary circular reactions. This stage is often referred to as the stage of the little scientist. So all those laws of the world that we accept for granted, they have to learn. If you knock over your milk glass, and it wasn't a sippy cup, milk goes over, which is probably satisfying and interesting and unexpected. Maybe it's their siblings. We'll say their sibling's cup. So they do it again, and it's just as interesting. The other sibling, and the milk flows over, people make interesting, fun reactions. Okay, that can be done on purpose. So adding on. So learning how the world works. So that is an overlap for the previous stage, but we're learning how the world works. If we knock something off the table and it splats on the floor, interesting, but we have to do it many more times to see if it always happens. Maybe it should go to the wall. Maybe it should hit the ceiling. You wouldn't know. So learning how the world works. And the last stage, mental representations, we can now think of things. We can have things stand for other things, in other words, symbolic thought. So we can pretend the doll can be a sibling, the doll can be a parent, a shoe can be a phone. So things can stand in for other things, and now we can think much more extensively about other things. Big jump in cognitive ability. Piaget is definitely considered to be one of the great and most influential of all psychologists, and still had the most impact by far of anyone in the study of children's thinking. We do recognize a couple very, very minor issues with his theories. He underestimated the milestones because he confused the child's limitations of the ability to do the behavior with cognitive limitations. You saw some very clever experiments, such as René Beaujean's experiment, that kind of took care of this issue. And although his substages for the sensory motor stage had distinct boundaries, we realize that in reality they do overlap. So look at this very famous, at least within psychology, experiment on infant memory performed by Rove Collier. On the slide you can see the outcome. Please actually visit the video to see the methodology, which I think is quite clever. You might remember we said one of the limitations of Piaget, or actually we'll find later on, if we haven't already done it, that one of the limitations of Piaget is that he assumed that there were knowledge missing in infants because of lack of the ability to respond. Newer methods can parcel out better the lack of knowledge from just the inability to react, or basically tell us verbally what they know and what they don't know. Don't be too surprised to possibly see a text question on this experiment, asking you to explain how it was done and what was found. Let's consider infant amnesia, the idea that we do not remember the first few years of life, and if you do, chances are what you remember is not the memory, but a reconstruction of the story that you've heard. I shared a Piaget story and a personal story to that effect in Intro Psych. Earliest memories tend to date to 2 or 2.5 or even 3, though I can date my earliest memory just before 4, when my brother was born. Why infant amnesia? Well, in part, you might remember from Intro Psych, the hippocampus, my mnemonic for my students, lost hippo on the college campus because it's lost its memory. Anyway, the hippocampus is still forming, so memories are not being consolidated long-term properly. Also, at this age, there's pre-language thought that's dominating, and when we switch into a language-based thought, it doesn't necessarily carry. We should also say that self-awareness explodes at this age. At about 16 months, a child can refer to themselves by their name, Jimmy or Mary or Jamal, whatever, and point and name to themselves in a picture. And in a very short time, they use me and I, which again tells you that they are now becoming aware of themselves. Some exceptions to the pre-language and self-awareness are some individuals on the spectrum. Some individuals, we mentioned Temple Grandin in my intro psych, she continued to continued to think in a pictorial, non-language way. Certainly not true of all people on the spectrum. And I often have a student or two that's not on the spectrum that will share they think this way, though I have a hard time explaining it. Self-awareness is another thing that might differ on people on the spectrum. Even though they can name themselves and do the pointing and the picture, some are delayed in the I and me, and indeed some never master the concept of I and me. Next, let's consider a theory of moral development, one proposed by Kohlberg. It has 6 stages, and these stages are divided into 3 levels. First, we'll start at the pre-conventional stages of 1 and 2. We all began at stage 1. A person in stage 1, when they're deciding to do a decision or not to do a decision, the only focus is punishment. Will mommy punish me? Will my teacher punish me? So the only consideration is punishment. If that's the only thing that guides you in life is whether or not you'll be punished, that would be a pre-moral way of living. Another pre-conventional way of looking at moral development, and another pre-conventional stage, is stage 2. That focuses on self-benefit. The person is primarily overwhelmingly concerned with how that action benefits them. If it benefits them, they'll do it. If it does not benefit them, they will not do it. And that is their focus. Again, if that's the only thing that drives your decision-making in life, that would be a pre-moral stage, or pre-conventional stage of reasoning. We all began in the earliest stages of 1 and 2, and most of us have left these 2 stages, though if you go down to the local jail or prison, you will find many people there that are in fact still in stage 1 or 2, probably no small part of why they're in that particular predicament. Let's go to stage 3, often termed the good boy and nice girl stage by Kohlberg. In this one, there's a couple different focuses of reasoning. One is the person perceives themselves as a good person and as a nice person and wants to be perceived as others as being good and nice. Also part of that reasoning of this stage is their heart. They listen to their heart. They listen to their emotions. So again, the 2 components for stage 3 are caring about how other people perceive you and listening to your heart. Stage 3 is a stage that many women peak at and stay at. This is not to say that men are not there too, but this is a particularly what men call feminine stage. Let's consider the next stage, law and duty. The person is particularly focused on following the law in meeting their duties and obligations. Many men tend to peak at this particular stage. Now, of course, there are women at this stage too, but there are more males than females at this particular stage. Stages 5 and 6 are by far the less common. Stage 5 is social contract. In this stage, the person considers the needs of society and the individual and considers both in their reasoning. Stage 6 is very rare. A small sample would have no stage 6 people at all. It's the stage of universal ethical principles. It's Bailey wandering into the room right now if you're wondering what the clicking is. So if you would do it for one person, the word universal would imply that you would do it for all people, for all situations. Let's look at how Kohlberg acquired his data. He created stories, scenarios. His most famous one was the Heinz dilemma. In this dilemma, Heinz is a man whose wife has cancer. Only one drug can save her. It's made locally, but the pharmacist wants a fortune for the drug, and Heinz is a poor man. He cannot come up with his money for the drug. There's only 2 choices. He steals the drug, and his wife has an excellent shot at living. He does not steal the drug, and she will die. And again, those are the only 2 choices. Kohlberg would then ask his subject, what should Heinz do? And more importantly, why do you say that? So let's go through all these stages and see what reasoning a person of each stage would propose. But first, put a little brief summary of the Heinz dilemma into your notes. So let's start with stage 1. Give an answer that would reflect punishment. It might jump out at you. The person would say, no, he could get caught. He could be sent to jail. Can you think of any reasons why Hines should say that he should steal the drug? Now, if you're saying, oh, he loves his wife, no, that's not related to punishment. So you might say, well, just because he steals the drug doesn't mean he's going to get caught. Just because he gets caught doesn't mean that he'll get a sentence. The jury would be probably so sympathetic that even if caught, he would not be punished. So again, the answer is going to revolve and focus on punishment. Let's consider self-benefits. Give me some reasons why Hines should steal the drug. Now, if you're saying to keep his wife alive, well, what is the benefit? Be more specific for me. He loves her? No, that's a different stage. So self-benefit, what does he get having the wife in his life? Okay, you might say that she cooks for him, then she cleans the dishes. What else? Maybe she takes care of the kids. She's a soccer mom. And I would say, well, what else? Maybe she works so he doesn't have to. She works a job and a half. And I would say, well, what else? What does she do in the wintertime? Shovels. What does she do in the fall? Somebody's got to rake. What does she do in the summer? Well, somebody's got to mow the lawn. So Hines would do it because it was a distinct benefit. Well, how about the other side of the coin rather? What's the self-benefit in terms of not stealing the drug? Well, maybe she's showing wear and tear. Maybe there's life insurance and he can get himself a younger model, a trophy wife. Maybe he was getting displeased with her attitude and maybe he was planning to divorce her anyway. Well, in divorce, you have to pay half your assets. If she dies, well, all the assets are his to keep. Again, not very moral, but again, that's a pre-moral. That's the pre-conventional stage. Let's consider a good boy, nice girl. Why should he steal the drug? This is the stage where you can say he loves her. Or what would the neighbors think if he was so cowardly that he let her die? But then again, maybe he shouldn't, because what would the neighbors think if he was put in handcuffs and taken away? Next, let's consider law and duty. You might say, well, he can't do it. It would be breaking the law. So even if there was no punishment, you shouldn't do it because it's breaking the law. Or maybe you can somehow construe this as part of your marital obligations. It might be your duty to keep your spouse happy and healthy and alive. Very few people would get to stage 5, the social contract stage. The person would think of both the needs of society and the individual. For example, maybe you'd say that she's a good woman. It would benefit her to stay alive. It would benefit Hines. And because she's a good woman, society would benefit. Win-win, steal the drug. But conversely, you might say that even though she's a good woman, and it would be a shame to lose her, if we all broke laws and we felt justified, there would be mass suffering. So for the good of society, sadly, we should not steal it. Now, in terms of universal ethical principles, think of universal across people, across situations. So let me ask you a couple questions. If you had a child and your child needs one of your 2 kidneys, would you give it? If you can't say yes, please, you don't have a child. But let's say it's not your child. Let's say it's your mother-in-law, who your partner is very fond of, but you distinctly are not. Will you still go through that painful surgery? Okay. If you said let's say that your neighbor needs it, and he is not Mr. Rogers. Let's say that he has a reputation and people are questioning the disappearance of local dogs and cats and attribute it to him. He's been seen to try to run them down. Let's say that he's trying to institute fracking on his property, which will poison all the local water supply. Let's say he's suing most of the neighbors. Think of the most heinous characteristics that you could put attached to a person and say that his neighbor fits all of them. He's a member of the KKK, neo-Nazi, everything that you find despicable. Would you give your kidney to your neighbor? Most of us would say, basically, hell no. But if you had a universal ethical principle set, you would say, he's a human being. If you do it for your neighbor, you would also do it for your child, and vice versa. So you can see that very, very few of us are at stage 6. I certainly am not. In a prior slide, we saw that it's recommended that children 18 months or younger have no screen time whatsoever, except for maybe FaceTime and grandma. To continue this idea, the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, strongly recommends against mass media exposure prior to 2.5. These children that are heavy exposure have decreased language deficits, attention issues, and reading deficits. So we'll be able to tell children once they get to pre-K and K basically how much mass media exposure, how much time they were sitting being entertained by gadgetry and laptops and so on. Not a good babysitter. Convenient, but not good in the long run whatsoever. And I do find some of these individuals in the classroom that can't stay off their cell phone for even an hour and 15 minutes. How can we look at the quality of a child's home? Well, the home inventory is a checklist which is widely used to assess the child's development, used from birth to age 3, and you can see what the acronym stands for. It's not typical practice in our country to assess each child's household environment, but if we did so, just one brief check during the first 2 to 4 years, or 2 brief checks, a myriad of issues could be prevented. Children could be more readily diagnosed and assessed for issues and parenting issues. It really shouldn't be income-based. It should just be really done for the safety of children. Unfortunately, we just don't have, I wouldn't say the resources, but I would say the will to do such a thing. Let's consider an infant intelligence test. The Bailey would probably be the one that would be used. It's specific for toddler development. You're wondering, why do we need to know intelligence? We're not trying to predict intelligence of adult or later childhood. We're using it for screening to see if the child needs to be provided enriched stimulation and other services. It might be a child exposed to anoxia, severely preterm, child that's showing already signs of cerebral palsy. There are 3 primary scales that are used. Cognition, in other words, habituation. We mentioned the habituation before in learning. Language, if it's appropriate when the child's being assessed, and their motor development. And other than the 3 primary scales of cognition, language, and motor, 2 parental reports can be used. Socio-emotional, how the child is interacting with others socially and emotionally, and how they adapt to their environment. So again, 2 parental scales of social and emotional. So how does it do its screening? Well, there's 3 primary scales: cognition, and they look at the type of learning called habituation that we mentioned before in the course. It also looks at language for that age child and their motor development. It also uses one or both of the parental scales. One's socio-emotional, one of our domains, and the other is their adaptiveness to environmental changes and so on. I will also mention that I shared that with you just so you get a better picture, but you're not going to see a quiz or test question on the particular subscales mentioned just a second ago. In the U.S., 60% of moms work outside of the home, and it's typically the mom that would be doing the in-home care primarily if she is a stay-at-home mother, but again, more than half work outside the home, so we should consider child care. I should mention that I have friends in Germany, and one of them was shared in a recent conversation over the holiday break that in his grandchildren, that in Germany it's considered to be a right to have a job. It's also considered to be a right to have access to child care, and it's heavily supplemented by income. So in most countries, parents don't bear the, at least most affluent countries like ourselves, parents don't bear the brunt of the extreme financial costs associated with child care. There are national and state standards for daycare. the national standards is NAEYC, as you can see what the acronym stands for, National Association for the Education of Young Children. And they're concerned with developmentally appropriate practice, so not just using the child's time and keeping them safe, but stimulating learning in the 3 domains that we know so well, I hope. Poor quality facilities can not only be physically dangerous, but they can also cause lasting damage to both socio-emotional and particularly cognitive development. I should mention in some state dog kennels are inspected more frequently than our daycare centers. Unlike the US, most European countries federally support and regulate daycare facilities. We mentioned that the National Association of the Education of Young Children sets the guidelines, but they do not regulate. Roughly only 20 to 25% daycare centers are rated as high quality, meeting the needs in all 3 domains of the children. It's eventually very likely that the U.S. will arrive to the point of other Western nations and developed countries in that of providing education starting as soon as the child's able to be taken care of outside the home through kindergarten, which is clearly not the case in our country. Right now, New York is expanded into providing free pre-K care in very limited areas of the states. Some based on regions that are particularly economically disadvantaged, others for just individuals within a region who are very economically disadvantaged. More excitingly, though, the state of New Mexico, as of spring of 2026, has instituted universal pre-K education without cost to parents. This is an exciting development. It's going to have benefits for not only families and children, but perhaps hopefully lasting consideration, the economy. When mom can work unfettered, or dad, it is a boon not only to the family, but to the economy. So let's just make sure you're comfortable with mental representations. So they're internal representations. So an image. So if I say banana, you can think of a yellow banana, a green banana. No problem. We can mentally do this. A child before this age cannot. Concepts. Bad. So a child might tell its stuffed toy that it's bad after the child did something bad. Probably might call this a little bit of projection, but we won't go there. So it could be concept or an image. Symbolic understanding, we probably can't imagine not having it. Realize that something stands for things. Maybe put words, perhaps symbols. Either one is fine. So not only imitation, but I'm sneaking in deferred imitation, meaning done later on. So they don't imitate your poor choice of language, maybe in the house, but they do it at school or church or synagogue or a mosque or the supermarket. Take your pick. But our focus is the make-believe play, and that would be, I assume, would jump out at you at the last stage. So good. So to use your knowledge to walk through these stages, you're probably going to have to walk through the previous ones. So we're looking at intentional and goal-directed. So we know the first one's reflexive, hopefully. Next one is the body-oriented one. In other words, primary circular reactions. The next one is the object-related one. In other words, secondary circular reactions. And the next one is the intentional and goal-directed. So if you remember, the first one is kind of, you can ignore it because it's part of the second one. So stage 2, the primary, that's 1 to 4. The next one's 4 to 8. So this one very conveniently is 8 to 12. Oh, and name. Well, we have maybe a little confusingly secondary circuit reactions, but now we've got the coordination, so don't jump into the tertiary. So you might have to practice that little one. I know I did.